Hi, Peter Boyles, of course, from Saturday mornings on 710 KNUS, and now what's turned out to be just a wonderful experience, the show on YouTube that appears on the website as well as on YouTube that we have dubbed The Shoot, a term from professional wrestling about a real match, not something that people are faking. And I mentioned to the producers of the show, they said, who would you love to have on as we come up to the holiday season? I said, I don't know if he'll work because he's so busy, but Jack Phillips. And I got the phone call on Monday, Jack will do the show.
It's an honor to.
I know. I mean, I tell people. And also with us zooming in is Jake Warner with the Alliance Defending Freedom, and he's in Scottsdale, Arizona, so you can see him on the screen as well. And I believe, Jake, you and I may have met at Masterpiece, sometime in the last pre-post-COVID, I don't know, but because I look at your face and it's familiar, and I think we met there. My involvement is I had lost a job at a radio station here in town, KHW Radio, and in spite of all the protests, they gave me a job here at 710 KNUS, and I went to work for Brian Taylor and Kelly Michaels, both who are very devout men. And for the record, I am not. But I see this story of this guy fighting against the power of the government. So I pitched them, and I go, and I had not even met Jack at that point. I said, we got to help this guy. He's like standing there all by himself. So it was because Mark Crowley told me December the 13th, 2013, guys, how many years have we been fighting this thing? And I went down, introduced myself to Jack, and we put on a remote as a fundraiser. And that was one of, how many have we done?
2 or 3 or 4, I don't recall.
Yeah, someone said 5. I said, no, I don't think we did 5, but I think we might have done 4.
Could be.
And we always went back. And there was just something about him, and I don't often say this, but he is a true believer. He's got a great fighting heart, and things mean something to Jack. And that's how I describe him. And he's taken a beating.
Thank you, Pete. I also have outstanding attorneys that have been helping us all along the way here at Alliance Defending Freedom.
Without me telling the story, you tell the story. What happened to you?
So back in 2012, July the 19th, it was a Thursday afternoon. Normally busy afternoon at the cake shop. I had 2 girls working for me that day, and 2 men came in and sat at the wedding desk, and so it fell to me to go over and sit down and discuss what kind of a cake celebration they needed. And so I went over and sat down, and David was sitting over here, Charlie was sitting over here. We made introductions. David, Charlie, I'm Jack. How can I help you? David said, we're here to look at wedding cakes. And Charlie said, it's for our wedding. So immediately I knew that this was not a cake I could create because it's a celebration of marriage that goes against my deeply held religious beliefs, that God designed marriage to be between a man and a woman. So how am I going to tell these 2 guys as gently as possible that I can't create the cake they're asking for? And I said, sorry guys, I don't do cakes for same-sex weddings, expecting some more conversation so we could, discuss what was going on. And there was just like silence. They were just looking at me like, what did you just say? I said, I'll make you birthday cakes, shower cakes, sell you cookies, brownies, but I just don't do cakes for same-sex weddings. David jumps up, swears at me, flips me off, and storms out the door. Charlie gets up, and I didn't notice, but there was a woman sitting at one of our tables. That was his mom. He went over, got her, and they left. And I thought, what in the world just happened? I'll be glad to serve them. I'll make them any other cake, custom cake that I would make for anybody, but I couldn't create that one because a wedding cake, in my mind, has an inherent message. When you walk into a room, you see the cake in the corner. There's a wedding and a marriage to be celebrated. But they didn't give me that opportunity. So then they filed a complaint with the state Civil Rights Division, and the division sent it over to the commission, and the state of Colorado then sued me.
When was the first contact you had with the state, with the government?
I think it was in October of 2012 when I got the official paperwork in the mail that I was being sued.
back over to Jake for a moment. Jake, my personal belief is, because I don't want to pull Jack into this, they shopped him. They knew who he was because from my own research, there had been a lesbian couple had gone in and were told the same thing. And I think that was the trigger. And I think that they were looking for the right guys, and they're going to what I called shop Jack. Now, I know you've been to Jack's store. It's not on the main thoroughfare. I mean, you have to hunt to find it. The first time I think I went on my motorcycle, and I think I rode around for like, where in this place? And then there it is. I mean, so these guys weren't just in the neighborhood and decided to drop in on you. They shopped you. They knew what was going to happen. I'm sure they had everybody on alert, and then they came at him. When did you get involved?
Well, ADF got involved soon after the two men left Jack's shop. And you highlight an important point. You know, for the last 10 years, what we've seen is activists and government officials targeting people for punishment simply because they disagree with them. And we know that from Jack's most recent case. I know we'll probably get to this later in the show, but the attorney who is suing Jack now tracked Jack all the way back to 2012. That attorney emailed Jack twice, calling him a bigot and a hypocrite. And then a few years later, the same day that the U.S. Supreme Court decided to hear Jack's first case, the attorney called back and asked for a custom blue and pink cake that would celebrate a gender transition. And then a few months later, called back and asked for a custom cake depicting Satan smoking marijuana. And why? Well, the attorney said it was to correct the errors of Jack's thinking. What we have is mere disagreement over important life issues. But instead of talking these things out and addressing them civilly, activists and government officials are targeting those that they disagree with. And that shouldn't be what the government's doing.
I believe John Hickenlooper was governor when
He was
this
governor,
began.
yeah.
And I did a deep dive on a civil rights commission who appointed the commissioners. They were not elected, they were appointed. To appoint someone and then give them that much power that they could come and destroy this good man's life. And that was like, for me, it was like, okay, now we can go to war. And the interesting thing about them, Jack and Charlie, I'll use the word, chickened out. I invited them, and I'm a gay rights advocate. I'm for gay marriage, personally. I invited them on the radio show dozens of times. Wouldn't come near me. People invited the commissioners to come on. They wouldn't come on. And I always thought of Jack as that thing we've all seen with the eagle flying in like this and that little mouse, doing this just as the eagle's about to hit. That guy, he taught me more about faith than certainly anybody in a long time. And those guys, what they did to you is so wrong. And so we should do this before we go back again. Where does it stand now?
We are in our third lawsuit. This attorney that filed a complaint that Jake was talking about called us up on the day that the Supreme Court announced that they were going to take our case, asked for the cake to celebrate the gender transition. And so the commission took that case up, and Jake can explain better why they dismissed it, but then they dismissed it. And I'll turn it over to Jake if you want to jump in
please.
here.
Yeah, sure. I'll bring us up to speed here. So the attorney that requested the custom blue and pink cake to celebrate a gender transition and the Satan cake filed a discrimination charge against Jack with the Colorado Civil Rights Division. And just a few weeks after the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling in Jack's favor in the first case, the division came after Jack again, finding probable cause that Jack had violated the law, and then decided to prosecute him.
It's important to remember these are just appointed, and they come with a political position. These are not arbiters of the truth. These are not people looking for, the Lady Justice with the scales looking for, where the evidence points. They're set to go.
You raise a good point there, because shortly after the state decided to prosecute Jack again, we actually went on offense. We filed a federal lawsuit and said, look, you can't do this. The Supreme Court just ruled in favor of Jack. So we asked the court to stop the division's enforcement of the law to try to punish Jack again for declining to express a message. And one of our points was that, look, the commission here is acting both as the prosecutor and judge, and that's not fair.
No, of course
So
not. Yeah.
midway through that lawsuit, new evidence surfaced about the commission's ongoing hostility against Jack and his faith. And then a few days later, the state just abandoned the lawsuit and dismissed the case.
Didn't they find the one commissioner had been way past her point of dismissal, and they kept, I remember reading this, I was thinking about you last night, they kept her because she was the tip of the spear on Jack, and she should have been off the commission. And again, it's, fighting U.S. Senator John Hickenlooper, then governor, but they allowed that to happen to him. I didn't mean to interrupt, I'm sorry.
No, well, the case should have been over at that point. The attorney that was suing Jack should have appealed that dismissal, but refused to do so. Instead, the attorney started over with a new lawsuit in civil court. And that's the third lawsuit we've been talking about here for a few minutes. And we went to trial on that case about a year and a half ago. And after the trial court decided to punish Jack. The trial court said the state of Colorado could force Jack to create a custom cake that would celebrate a gender transition. So Alliance Defending Freedom appealed that decision on Jack's behalf, and now we're at the Colorado Court of Appeals again. And we're asking that court to uphold the right of every American to say what they believe without fear of government punishment. And I think that's a critical thing to know about Jack. He's not just fighting for his freedom to say what he believes. He's fighting for the freedom of all Americans to say what they believe without fear of government punishment. A win for Jack in this case would be a win for even cake artists who disagree with Jack on marriage and gender and life's biggest issues. An LGBT website designer, for example, should not be forced to create custom websites celebrating views of marriage that goes against her beliefs. But a win for Jack would protect her right to create art consistently with her beliefs. So I think that that's a critical point that your listeners need to know about, is that Jack is fighting for the freedom of all Americans, not just his rights.
And I think that became the tipping point for me, was when I realized that what I can do on the radio and what Jack can do in the cake shop and what other people can do, we've seen what wokeness will do. And Jack got clipped way before woke was in the lexicon. You did. I mean, when you think about it, no one would have known woke, but Jack, I think, was an early victim of that. Your thoughts?
Certainly, Jack was one of the very first Americans to be targeted, mainly because of his views on one of life's biggest issues. And then Washington florist Barronelle Stutzman was also targeted around the same time. And you're right, they were at the tip of the spear. Government and activists were beginning to target people simply because of their views on marriage and other of life's biggest issues. And Jack in Barronelle's case went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And thankfully, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of Jack back in 2018. But that did not deter government officials and activists from still going after people like Jack and threatening to force them to speak messages that go against their deepest beliefs. And that's actually why we're going back up to the U.S. Supreme Court here in a few months on behalf of a Colorado web designer.
Do you have a better shot, do you think, now that the complexion of the court has changed with 3 conservative justices? You think you have a shot?
We certainly expect the court to interpret the law as written in any given case, but we are very optimistic in the web designer's case. And the one I'm talking about is 303 Creative via Linus. It's going to be argued on December 5th. And what happened in that case was Lori Smith, who is a Colorado website designer, she saw what the state was doing, prosecuting Jack all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And she wanted to start creating websites celebrating God's design for marriage between a man and a woman. But she wondered, well, will the state come after me like it came after Jack? So she sued to learn her constitutional rights before she was facing punishment. And every court below ruled that the state could force her to create custom speech, custom websites celebrating views of marriage that go against her beliefs. And thankfully, the U.S. Supreme Court has decided to hear that case and is going to answer once and for all, can the government force people to say things they don't believe? It was the question left unanswered in Jack's first case.
If we look at society today, we have an answer, but it's not the legal court answer, but you're nodding your head. You see what's going on out there. You see what's taking place in schools, and you see what's taking place in the media and sports, and I give you a litany. So talk about business today and how it affected you, and I know you went through quite a bit. So when you were targeted as a bigot, you were targeted, I mean, they just came after this guy. I watched it. I mean, I caught, it's no big deal, but I caught like the tail of the comet because I was, quote, Jack's guy. I'm going, this has nothing to do with gay, straight. This has to do with the rights of a human being in our republic. Take it no further than those kinds of statements. They're incapable. So talk about what happened, please.
So we went to court, like we've discussed, going to the U.S. Supreme Court. The commission initially ruled that I had to change my policies and start making cakes that went against my faith. I had to retrain my staff.
You had to go to school, didn't you?
That was part of
re-education camp.
I was supposed to re-educate my employees, and one of those employees was my mom, who was in her late 80s at the time, and she told me, I'm not going to be re-educated. Thanks, Mom. But then, if I were to make wedding cakes, I had to make them according to the commission's ruling for same-sex weddings as well, and so I knew I couldn't do that. It goes against what I believe a marriage is. So we decided to give up our wedding business, which was a large part of our business. And at the time that David and Charlie came in, I had, on that payroll the week before, I had 10 employees, and that went down to 4, counting myself. And now we have a couple more part-time people, but we're still not doing.
And it doesn't matter to them that good, decent people, craftspeople, lose their gigs working for Jack, creating these cakes. And now they're in the wind. And these people see it as the right thing.
And Peter, we're talking about the personal cost. There was tremendous personal cost for Jack here. I mean, just in the days after the two men came in Jack's shop, Jack, why don't you talk about just some of the things that you experienced and one of the kind of toughest phone calls you've ever received at the cake shop?
Yeah. It was close to opening one morning. Just afterwards, my daughter was in the back with her daughter, who was almost 4 years old at the time. And I pick up the phone, and I'd gotten just days and back-to-back horrible phone calls. But I always pick up the phone, try with a smile, and say, "Masterpiece Cakeshop, this is Jack. How can I help you?" And then see who's on the phone. And this guy says, "Oh, you're Jack? Yeah? Well, I'm in my car. I'm on my way to your shop." Okay. And I've got a gun.
I remember.
And I'm going to blow your head off. And I thought, is this for real? I don't know. I've had so many goofy, horrible calls. I think I'm going to err on the side of caution. There's my daughter here. I don't want her to say anything like that. So I called the police and told her, "You go stay in the back until the police come. We'll see what." And this guy kept calling and calling. I'm just, a few minutes from your shop. And so I waited, and the phone kept ringing. Finally, the police officer pulled up, and he came in. I explained what was going on. The phone was ringing. He said, "You want to take the call?" So I handed the call to the policeman, and couldn't trace it, couldn't do anything with it. So I don't know what happened if, the guy pulled into the lot, saw the police car standing there, and didn't come in, or if it was just a bogus call and he was in Argentina. I don't know.
You don't know. No.
Yeah, but it was a point then where I thought, this is more important than just Jack and his cake shop. And then later on, when we were appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court, we were talking about, that the court can only take a small percentage of the, less than 1% of the cases that are presented to them. So if we filed, what are the odds of getting heard? And talking to the attorneys, like, we're already not being heard. Let's go ahead and file. What's the worst that could happen? They officially tell you you're not being heard. No, the worst that could happen is that you're heard and you lose. Yeah. And that's the point where I think it really dawned on me that this isn't just about Jack and his cake shop. This is about the rights of every American, creative professional or not, every American to live and work according to their conscience without fear of being punished by the government. And so we went ahead with that petition, and like I said, the court granted the petition.
I think when we came back the third time to fundraise for Jack, and I remember having that feeling that we're not here for, and I've describe Jack as a shoemaker. He's like loves his family. He has a gift, and he can repair shoes and boots, and he's at a little shop. And why can't they leave him alone? And I remember parking that morning, and you and I were having coffee, and it was like we started at 5, I don't know, 4:30, and I'm looking at this guy, and I'm going, he's a hero, and he's a hero of this country. Now, he's been terribly maligned, he's lost money, lost his business, but there's something about this flame that's in Jack that a guy like me goes, hey, how long do you fight him? How long do you wait until you go, you can have the whole thing. Goodbye, see you later. Neither one of us are kids anymore. And then of course if you give up, then they win.
And that's why I'll go back to Alliance Defending Freedom. They're the best. They're the biggest organization that handles these kind of cases, and they're the best. And they've been with us side by side.
I remember those guys were down there that couple of times that we met them. Yeah,
but they're defending Lori Smith. They're defending so many cases like this.
Defending everyone watching this. So Jake, what happens?
Well, Jack is still in court. We're waiting for a decision from the Colorado Court of Appeals, and we're hoping that the court's going to make the right call, that it's going to uphold the freedom of all Coloradans to say what they believe without fear of being punished by the government. But that's not the last stop. Certainly, the Colorado Supreme Court and even the U.S. Supreme Court are possible future stops in Jack's case. But we hope that this case that we're arguing here in a month before the U.S. Supreme Court with the Colorado website designer, Lori Smith, that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to help resolve this issue, that it's going to affirm the right of every American to say what they believe without fear of government punishment, and say once and for all that the state of Colorado can't force artists, no matter what they believe, to say messages that go against their deepest beliefs.
But they would not try. They would not try to do it. Politics plays out in this, and we all know it. The reason they targeted Jack had nothing to do. It wasn't trying to control art. They're trying to control Jack for his specific belief, and it has nothing to do with whether or not Jack. When you remember things like the Piss Christ, and remember those kinds of things that National Endowment underwrote, it was fine. But and again, I am not a religious person, but when it got down to something like Jack's argument, then it becomes an art. Then it becomes an issue.
Yeah, and Peter, it's worth remembering how the state of Colorado treated Jack in the very first case. The reason the Supreme Court didn't reach the free speech issue was because the free exercise violation was so clear.
Sure.
Colorado officials had compared Jack and his faith to that of slaveholders and Nazis.
They're Nazis. There was that tape that snuck out.
These were just wild and hostile comments, just impermissible hostility in the words of the court. But more than that, the state of Colorado had discriminated against Jack and his faith. During Jack's first case, a religious man went to 3 other cake artists asking them to create custom cakes criticizing same-sex marriage. And then that religious man filed a discrimination charge, just like the 2 men did in Jack's case. But instead of prosecuting those 3 cake artists, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission said no, they objected to the message, not to the person. And they said, look, they have a right to decline to create or expression that goes against what they believe. But that's exactly what they did not do in Jack's case. They afforded those other 3 cake artists a freedom that they denied to Jack.
It was Jack's faith. I'm convinced. Jack's faith was the third rail.
And that's exactly what the U.S. Supreme Court said in 2018.
Yeah. The other part of that when we were really following it, when we got to the Civil Rights Commission, they were all appointees. We just voted last Tuesday. You didn't see civil rights commissioners on the ballot. These were hand-picked. John Hickenlooper, and I was told, I don't know this to be true, that Hickenlooper was handed a list by the people who underwrote a lot of John Hickenlooper's success in becoming governor, who had a bent to their beliefs, and they said, these are your commissioners, Governor, and he put them on. And they went after this guy. It's wrong. It's wrong. And You know, and so what does happen to you guys? What's the future bring?
I think the good news is we're actually starting to see courts get the answer right. Alliance Defending Freedom has represented creative professionals and artists all across the country. Here in Arizona, for example, we represented a calligrapher and painter who wanted to create wedding art consistent with their faith. We took that case all the way up to the Arizona Supreme Court, and that court affirmed their First Amendment right to create art consistent with their beliefs. And then we also won a case at the Eighth Circuit on behalf of 2 Minnesota filmmakers, and we're representing photographers all up and down the East Coast, recently getting a win out of the state of Kentucky in a federal court there, saying that government couldn't force them to photograph weddings and celebrate views of marriage inconsistent with their beliefs. So courts are getting it right, and we're hoping that this will crescendo into next summer's decision at the U.S. Supreme Court, where we hope that court will affirm the right of every American to say what they believe without fear of punishment.
For people watching this, and you two in particular, the fact that you have to is stunning to me. You know, I read history and I try to understand Jefferson and the framers. The fact that here we sit and that you have to do this, I mean, it's insane. I mean, Thomas Jefferson would never be involved in this. Neither would Hamilton or any of the framers. They wouldn't have been bothered with this. They'd have seen it for what it was. The fact that you actually have to do this, stunning.
Yeah. And taking it outside of this debate, I mean, I think it's critical to see how a win for Jack and a win for Lori Smith and 303 Creative is truly a win for all Americans. I mean, some jurisdictions, for example, they protect against distinctions on the basis of political background. And say there was a speechwriter in that jurisdiction, you know, just because they create speeches for Democratic candidates, can the government force them to turn around and draft a speech for a Republican candidate? That's just unthinkable. So if you get out of this context, it's easy to see that the government shouldn't force people to.
You know, one of the great things in history, that great line, "Here, hold my beer," you know, watch what happens if it isn't stopped. So to go over a couple quick things with Jack, Masterpiece, and we're coming up on Thanksgiving and people want things. This is called plugging in our business. Plug it. Plug your work.
Well, at Masterpiece Cakeshop, like I said right at the beginning, we serve everybody who comes in my shop. David and Charlie would be welcome to come to my shop, and we create delicious custom cakes and you know, help people celebrate special occasions in their life. Coming up in November for 3 days, we make pies. Next week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. The rest of the year, we just focus on custom cakes to help people celebrate. So we're glad to do that for anybody. Any of the cakes that we would make for anyone, we will make for everyone. But cakes with messages that I can't express, then I decline to create those.
Website?
The website is masterpiececakes.com with an S.
Where are you geographically?
We're at Wadsworth and Hamden, a block north of Hamden on the west side of Wadsworth in the Mission Trace shopping center.
Drive around, you'll find it. Now, Jake, how can people help you?
Well, if you want to learn more about the story of Jack and other artists like him, you can visit Alliance Defending Freedom's website, adflegal.org. You can learn more about our work. We're the world's largest law firm dedicated to protecting religious freedom, free speech, the sanctity of life, parental rights, and God's design for marriage and family. So you can learn more about our work there. And if you're inclined to support our mission, we represent people like Jack for free. But we can only do that because of support from those who support Jack and others like him. So visit our website. If you're inclined, feel free to financially support us too.
You know, that great line through history that always traces free people don't need the protection if they're free. And again, one more time, I have a story, I think I've told you this one, where we had finished our last, and we'll go back again, but we had finished our last fundraiser, and Walker Stapleton was running for governor. This is a true story. And I got home and I got this phone call. I won't say who the person is because you'll know. Walker Stapleton is really interested in Jack's case. And I went, this is wonderful. He's running as a Republican for governor. And I always envisioned commercials, and I said we could have a commercial where Walker and his beautiful wife and kids could pull up in front of the cake shop and get out, and the kids could have their piggy banks and go in, and they could give money, and he could spin to the camera and go, I'm Walker Stapleton. I stand with Jack Phillips. Stand with me. I told the guy the story. He goes, that's great, Peter. I never heard back from him. True story. So that doesn't shock you, does it? Yeah. And that was the Republican stalwart running for governor, Walker Stapleton. So when that happened, I thought, this guy's, now he's fighting off everybody, because I think Walker Stapleton, this is my guess, I don't know it, was afraid to be tainted by backing this man's freedom, because then they would be called, as Jack was, anti-gay or be called a bigot or whatever the hell they would have called him. And I really do believe that's why.
Well, you remind me of another person who, in our trial back in March a year and a half ago, came to our defense, testified on our behalf that I serve everybody. And this man,
I know him well,
is a gay activist who came into my shop the first day that you did the fundraiser.
Well, the first guy in with money.
First person in.
I know this guy. Yeah.
Here's my name.
Yeah.
I'm a gay man. How you doing?
Yeah.
I'm doing good. What can I do for you? And I think it might have caught him off guard, but he's been a friend ever since for 8-9 years now.
He and his husband are good friends of mine. So there is hope.
Yeah. So he understood that Jack serves everybody, but couldn't create every message. I've served him all the time. A couple transgender people that come in regularly who I'm glad to serve them. Anything I would serve to anybody.
But that isn't what. But you're the dust in the wind. What they want is the control that Jake's talking about. They don't care about you. You're roadkill. What they want is the next step. And if they get Jake, you'll be fighting them on another level.
Mm-hmm.
And they are prepared to defend Lori Smith and
absolutely
whoever else they need to, because it's right. It's the right of every American to be able to live.
Holidays are coming. Don't forget the man. His food's good. He's the man. It's so good to see you. I know we met. I'm looking. I'm saying I know this guy, and I think we met somewhere. We met at Jack's or
For
something,
sure.
and I think we'll get back into breach again. We'll see what the court does, and then take the cast and crew and go back down to Masterpiece. I'm proud
Great
of
to see you, Peter.
Pod, you're a friend, man. I really
Thank you,
do.
Peter.
Mark Crowley, thank you, and Brian, thank you, and Kelly Michaels, thank you, because they were the guys when I came in initially, and I didn't realize the date till Mark told me. He said, there's this guy down there that we got to go help. And they said, go get him, go help him. And it meant a lot. Happy Thanksgiving.
Same to you.
And you
Happy
too. And
Thanksgiving.
I'll see you guys again. Thank you, everybody. This will air. We have the Brother Jeff tape that'll air, and then this will air. And Mark Crowley, thank you. Take care, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.